Okay, good evening. Thank you for joining me. What we're going to try and do this evening, hopefully, is explore one aspect of Chanukah. We're going to go perhaps a little bit deeper than just the standard ideas, and let's see what we can, hopefully what we can uncover. We're going to start a little bit left of field with a Gemara that is actually talking primarily about Purim. It's quite a well-known Gemara, but let's read and translate the Gemara, and an understanding of this Gemara will help us in appreciating the significance and uniqueness of Chanukah. The Pasuk says in Tehillim, it compares Esther to Ayeles HaShachar. What is Ayeles HaShachar? Different opinions as to exactly what it means, whether it means the star of dawn, the gazelle of dawn. Either way, Esther is referenced as a personality that coincides with the onset, the break of dawn, the break of day, the break of light. When we emerge from night into bright light, into day, that is the Purim story. That's what the Gemara says. This tells you, Ma shachar soif kol halayla. In the same way that the dawn heralds the end of the night, the end of darkness, so too the story, the Purim story, is soif kol hanissim. It is the end of all miracles. The interaction that Hashem has with us, which is called miracle, which transcends, which goes above and beyond the natural order, the laws of physics, that comes to an end with the Purim story. That's it. The Gemara then asks a question. Hold on, that's not quite true, is that? Because, as we know, Chanukah happens afterwards. And our perspective on Chanukah is that it was a nace. It was a miracle. So how can you say that Esther is the Purim story is the final miracle? It's simply not true. The Chanukah story surely is the final miracle. Says the Gemara, yes, but nitna likosev ka'omrinon. Says the Gemara, there are two structures, two types of miracle. It is true, you are right. Chanukah is a miracle, and therefore, if we were just to say that Esther, the Purim story, is the very last miracle altogether, then you would be quite right in your challenge. But that's not what we meant. What we meant was that there are miracles which belong to an order which then get written down. We have the Megillas Esther. It forms part of the end of Torah Shebichsav, the written law. Those type of miracles, they finish with the Purim story. It is true. There is a miracle, a very important one, a big one, which happens later, which is the Chanukah one. And that is, of course, a nace, but it belongs to a whole different order. That is a miracle that is not to be written down. Now, before we go any further, what we're going to try and understand this evening a little bit is the most fundamental question. The most basic question really here is as follows. Let's look at the metaphor, if that's indeed what it is. If I were to ask you, you had to choose a metaphor to symbolize, to represent nace, miracle, and one to represent the natural order of things. And here are your choices. You have two symbols, if you like. One is night and one is dawn. Which one would you choose to symbolize miracle? Would miracle be light and dawn, or would miracle be night? I would have said a light and dawn, daybreak, where you can see things clearly. Because what is a nace after all? That very word nace, really, v'son nace lekabitz golu yosenu, means raise a banner, something which banishes doubt. It heralds, it proclaims, it speaks clearly, it reveals that which was obscure, that where there was dark, where there was confusion. A nace is a banner. It proclaims loud and clear Hashem exists, he's the boss, he's in charge, he's involved. And yet we find, and this is the most obvious question, which all the commentators, all the Mefarshim ask, why is it that if we're saying that Esther, the Purim story, is the end of all of the Nisim, and we are thus describing the period with which HaKadosh Baruch Hu interacts with us miraculously as being Laila, it's night. Surely, I would have thought that would be considered to be day. That's the most basic and obvious question. That's the first question. There are many answers. Tonight, I want to share with you an answer from Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz in his magnificent, he actually has 3 answers that I'm aware of in his Yaris Dvash. This is one of his answers. And it opens the door to taking this a little bit deeper, because we also need to look at the other bit that the Gemara says, which is that there are 2 structures of miracle. There is miracle which then gets written down, and there is miracle then which doesn't get written down. What does that mean? I'll try and summarize a little bit of an incredible essay in one of Reb Tzadok HaKohen's works in Resisei Laila, and we'll try and use that a little bit to try and understand. We're not going to be able to go through the whole thing, but let's try and use this to his ideas to understand this approach a little bit. There are 2 parts to Torah, as we know. There is the written Torah, the Torah Shebechsav, and there is the Torah Shebal Peh, the oral law. One, I mean, to use Reb Shamshon Raphael Hirsch's Moshel, his analogy, one is the body of the lecture, the essence of Torah, and the other are the brief notes that were written down almost as an aide memoir to be able to recapture the essence and the body of the lecture. Torah Shebal Peh is the Torah. The Torah Shebechsav, the genius and the miracle which is Torah, the written Torah, is that Hashem has miraculously captured everything that is Torah somehow into a finite number of words. And therefore we work backwards in the Gemara to try and work out how we work things out from. Where do we see it in a vav, in a whatever? But it goes deeper than that. It goes deeper than that. Here's a thought. With the halacha is, as we know, that the written Torah, you're not allowed to say by heart. Dvarim shebechsav, iatar rashoi la'imram bal peh. You're not allowed to quote psukim in halacha, with certain exceptions. But then we also have the exact opposite is also true, is it not? That the Torah Shebal Peh is meant to remain oral. It is oral by nature, and it is meant to remain oral as an exigency, as an emergency measure. Rabbi Yodanos said we had to write it down. But it's far from ideal. This is not. What does that mean? These 2 parts of Torah are not meant to stray into the province of the other. Let's think about that a little bit. We'll come back to that. But the Purim story is the coming to the end of Nevuah. In fact, what we have is, we have the Purim story, we then have the end of Nevuah, the end of direct communication, which we had for 1,000 years, almost exactly. We had direct communication with the Rabbeinu Shalom from the year of Har Sinai, 2448, almost exactly to the year, 1,000 years of prophecy. And it was widely available. Kiflayim ki yotzei Mitzrayim, says the Gemara. There was, even if the Gemara is hyperbole, which I don't know if it is, but even if it is, it meant there was a Navi on every street corner. You lost your car keys, you didn't know where your donkeys were. Well, you went and asked a Navi and he told you. Everybody knew. The Bnei HaNaviim, there were people who elevated themselves and refined themselves and were able to achieve direct communication from the Rabbeinu Shalom. Look in the Rambam to see what it means to be a Navi. And we had this for 1,000 years. There was no doubt about whether Hashem existed or whether we had a direct relationship with him. It was obvious. And then that all came to a close. More or less at the time of the Purim story or just after. This is it. This is the end. This is the end of a nace that can be then written down, that it's connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu talking to us directly. And then straight after we have the beginning of the flowering of Torah Shebaal Peh. And that coincides almost exactly with the Chanukah story. That's when Torah Shebaal Peh, an amazing thing happens. Just to put it into some context, for 1,000 years, we were quite passive. Hashem spoke to us. The Nevi'im saw Hashem. There was a chizoyon, and that's very much the idea of Torah Shebachsav. Think about it. Hashem speaks. The first thing that happens is Hashem speaks. It then gets captured and disembodied in ink and parchment, and it's captured there. It's in there somewhere. You can't speak it out. Ba'al Peh is to lose the connection to the Dvar Hashem that is contained within it at some level. And we absorb that. We connect to Hashem through that. And then that came to an end. That direct communication of the Nevuah came to an end. And then an amazing thing happens. Coincides with the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah and Shimon HaTzadik. Klal Yisrael finds its voice all of a sudden. Kibbutz Torah Misinai, Masorah Yeshua, Yeshua Lezkenim, Lezkenim Nevi'im, Masorah Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, Heim Omru. All of a sudden, Klal Yisrael finds its voice. They can speak. They can innovate. They can take the Torah Shebichsav, the written Torah, and they are able to express themselves through that and create something special and incredible that cannot and should not be written down. In the words of the Ramban in Bava Basra, Yodim ha'emes beruach hakodesh shebekirbam. Chacham odif minovi, says the Gemara. A chacham is greater than a novi. A novi can see what Hashem wants to tell him, absorb it, but it's not his. He's not allowed to repress or quash. He can't be kovish and nevuasa. It's not your property. It didn't originate with you. Maybe you elevated yourself and you became an appropriate vessel. But if you're told to say it, you have to say it. A chacham can be quiet sometimes. It's your Torah. You become the Sefer Torah, the repository of Torah, which is living and breathing within you. And therefore it can't be written down. You have to hear it directly from a chacham speaking. That's the Torah Shebaal Peh. And that's greater, as we're going to see, in a number of respects. This is what I'm just giving you the background. This is what's happening at the time. And it is really important for reasons that will become clear now. The Rambam, when he introduces Chanukah, says an amazing thing, says a beautiful thing, quite literally. He says, Mitzvahs ner Chanukah, mitzvah chavivo hi ad ma'od. It is most beloved. It is, and there's a medrash that talks about this in the same context. Chavivrin divrei soifrin yosem yena shel Torah. The words of the Chachomim are more beloved to Hashem than his own Torah. And this finds halachic expression in the way that we are meant to treat the wicks and the oils afterwards. It's directly linked to this idea. There's a concept of connectedness and being special and unique exclusivity, specifically connected to the Chanukah story. Why? What is this? Why is this? In order to do this, we have to delve a little bit into what was happening at the time and to understand the real danger that Yavon, that Greek culture posed to us, and in many respects still does. I'd like to try and explain that without being overly technical. Right at the beginning of creation, as the Maharal explains, because it's not a flaw, a design flaw. It's not something went wrong. No. Golus is written into the script, into the DNA of creation right at the beginning, even before there is light. For there can be no light if there is no darkness. First, the second pasuk in the Torah, the land is toihu and boihu and choshech al pnei tohim. Let's leave aside the first two. They reference the first two classic stages of Golus, of exile. But before we go any further, it's very clear That this is an integral part of creation. This is not a plan B. This is before Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or. The first is Toihu and Boihu. Let's leave those aside. And then we have, what's interesting is, notice the following. I hope this is, you can still see this on the, I don't know how to do ambulance writing, to do it backwards. That I can't do for the benefit of those on Zoom, but let's try it this way. So you have the first two, maybe black would be better, clearer. You have the first, you can't see a thing. You have the first two stages of Golus, which are Toihu and Boihu. But they are standalone. There's Toihu and there's Boihu. And then you have the next two, but there's an interconnectedness. V'choshech al pnei tehoim. The choshech isn't just this choshech. Its location, and this is a reference to Yavon, to the Syrian Greek exile, and this is a reference to Edom, Rome, modern Western civilization, whatever you want to call it. Okay? So this says the Medrash. So the choshech is al pnei tehoim. What does that tell us? I'll tell you what it tells us. It's really quite straightforward. And as a student of history, if anybody knows anything about history, and this is very clear, the Romans, and this is also clear in the Haftarah that we say, where Yavon is compared to the arrow in the bow, which is then used by Edom. It's the weaponry. Edom, the Romans were technocrats. They were architects. They were builders. They could get stuff done in an organized way. Mass armies, build roads, viaducts, all that sort of stuff. Walls. They could get stuff done. They were engineers. They were builders. They were technocrats. That's Asov, la'asos, to do stuff. They had it's very clear, they did not have any major culture of their own. They totally piggybacked on Greece. And Yavon, without a shadow of doubt, virtually every institution in modern Western democracies, the very word Democritus, wherever you turn, from aesthetics, from beauty of thought, they were the first civilization in a structured way to stop being hunter-gatherers and to start pondering meaning. Why? What is this all about? The unexamined life is not worth living. And then ranging from the Stoics to Aristotle and Plato and Socrates and Diogenes and Archimedes and all of them, maths, music, even the structure in music, architecture, philosophy, of course, everything, all of our structures and institutions and conventions, which we take for granted in modern Western civilization, it's all Yavon. And therefore Yavon, but this is the interesting thing. What is Yavon? You see, that's why Tehoim, the Rome is an abyss. It's a Tehoim. It's just a big pit there. There's nothing there. And it seems to be endless. But civilization has a veneer. I don't know how ich weiß nicht, wie man sagt das auf Deutsch. It has a veneer. It has a face. And the face is a very cultured one. It's one which purports, which looks as if it is very sophisticated. It is very cultured. It is very mechushban. It's thought through. It has value and meaning. It's deep. It's even beautiful. And it is beautiful. Beauty of thought, beauty of form. Yaft Elokim liyefes v'yishkoin ba'ahalei shem. There is real beauty, says the Gemara, says the Torah, in Greece, and it has a legitimate place in the tents of shame, in as much as a Sefer Torah could be written in Tzav Yavanis without going into the halachic details, but there is a connection. It is beautiful, but it's choshech. Once on a whimsy, I don't know if this works here. In England, it works. I once gave a lecture on this, and I called it Black Beauty, which is it's a book in Anasul. Anyway, so it's beauty and it's black at the same time. How can that be? It is beautiful. The Torah calls it beautiful. There is beauty. There is something to venerate, to be impressed by. At the same time, it is choshech. What is this? And we see this today, by the way, without going into any details. It's like the emperor's got no clothes. Think about virtually every institution, certainly in the last 2 decades, it's become incredible to see. Anybody who watches or hears the news and sees what's going on, every institution that appears to be on the face of it to have gravitas, to have morals and ethics, and sort of one by one, virtually everyone is the financial institutions in the 2008 and the Me Too, and then Hollywood didn't even need pulling down, the media, politics, what's left? Which institution is noble and has real virtue and it's gone? It's Choshech, which is Al Pnei Tehom. Now, but that's easy to dismiss. But it goes deeper than that. And we need to take this a little bit deeper. It goes a bit deeper. Because it's near yet so far. It is yaft, it is beauty. But it misses the mark. But we have to define a bit clearer how it misses the mark, exactly how it misses the mark and how that relates to us. So, let me do this a little bit backwards. Let's go to the Ramban. There is an incredible quote from the Ramban in Parshas Acharei Mos, where the Ramban references Aristotle, and there's a Kuzari here I want to talk about as well, the same thing. And then I'm going to bring you some modern quotes in this, and it's actually quite incredible. Says the Ramban, he's talking about the Soil Azazel. He's talking about something which is a bit strange to understand. And he says, I cannot explain this to you. Lo yuchal lefarish. Now, he doesn't mean I can't. He means I'm not going to. Ki hoyinu tzrichim lachsoim pi hamischakmim beteva hanimshochim achar hayevoni asher hikchish kol dova zulosi hamurgash loy. And in these few words, the Ramban, in a brilliant summation, he encapsulates the essence of what was wrong with the whole system. He says the reason I have to keep quiet is because the philosophers who follow Hayavoni, referencing Aristotle, asher hikchish kol davar zulos hamurgash loy. They deny the existence of anything that they cannot quantify, that they cannot haul into a lab under a microscope and observe. Empirically, there's another good Greek word. To see it, to measure it. Atom, that which is indivisible, that's the word. You can't do good, that's it, we're done. Atom, there's a joke, if there ever was one. But it's an arrogance. This is the Nakuda. This is really the point where we really get into the kishkas of what Chanukah is. It's an arrogance. Their chokhmah was real. Their chokhmah was brilliant. It was even beautiful. But the minute you disconnect it from attributing it to its divine source, and you arrogate to yourself and you put yourself up there on the pedestal, man is the be-all and end-all, boy, is that dark. That's the Yesod. That's it. I think it was Voltaire who said, in the beginning, God created man in his own image. And over the centuries, man has repaid the compliment. We've refashioned, if you've read Asterix, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's what we've done. What did the Greeks do? They took lots and lots and lots of their own weaknesses and turned them into deities. You've got this one fighting with that one, and this one is Dionysus, this one's drunk, and this one's Bacchanalian, and this one is... They've taken all the human frailties and weaknesses and elevated them. Those are gods. That's what gods are, because there's nothing beyond. This is it. The human form will run naked in the Olympics. It's me, 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 me. That's all there is. There is nothing beyond. If I cannot quantify it, if I cannot, what is that? That's an arrogance. What's the opposite of that? Chanukah in Kabbalah, Chanukah is connected to the sphere of Hoid, Hoida'ah, Aaron HaKohen, humility, to acknowledge. We say that Alanissim in the brach of Hoida'ah. Moidim anachnu lach. Moidim means first and foremost, doesn't mean to thank, it means to acknowledge. To be a Yehudi is to be humble. Yes, in Yiddishkeit, man is also at the center of the universe. Hoid v'hoda t'shavelov. It's not hoid d'chal hashomayim. We, man, that means man is a glorious divine creature at the apex of creation. Man is a B'Tselem Elokim, the most glorious, incredible. But that's because I am imbued with a neshama, with a seichel, which is, yes, that seichel, that ability to be rational and to work things out, which obligates me, as the Chovos Halevavos bases his whole shar of avodas elokim, as so many of the Rishonim have given shiurim on this recently. The Torah HaSeichel. But where does it come from? Why do I think like that? Acknowledge its divine origin, and then man and Torah Sheba'al Peh. That was, and this, now you understand the opposite. The arrogance of a man-centered universe where my achievements and only that which I can understand and quantify exists, nothing else exists. Mul, opposite, the Chachmei HaTorah, who are humble, but become incredibly creative. They are Machadesh. And when they do that, that's why it took place then. And when they do that, it becomes Chacham Odif Minavi. I'm going to read you some incredible stuff soon. I'll read you a couple of quotes very quickly, just to show this idea is alive. There's quite an important professor of zoology and biology in Harvard, Richard Lewontin, held this position until 98. I'll read you just one or two quotes from him, quite incredible. Our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between the science and the supernatural. You hear that? Our willingness to accept common science against common sense. We take the side of science in spite of the absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated stories, because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. Moreover, we know materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. And I've got a whole load of Richard Dawkins quotes on that line, reminding people that even though if you look everywhere, it would appear very, very strongly to suggest that the world is designed, but we must keep reminding ourselves that this cannot be. Biology, he says, is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Natural selection is the blind watchmaker. Yet the living results of natural selection overwhelmingly impress us with the illusion of design and planning. One more, I mean, there's plenty more. I have no explanation for complex biological design. All I know is that God isn't a good explanation. So we must wait and hope that somebody comes up with a better one. And there's many, many more in this. This idea of scientists being these cold, clinical, objective beings, and that science doesn't exist in a cultural context is just nonsense. Total nonsense. Christopher Hitchens, religion destroys everything. I take that as a sentence from a scientist. Everything, it poisons everything. There's a very scientific statement. We don't need to do any more work on that. There's plenty more. But again, this arrogance of Aristotle is alive and well. It's alive and well. And its nemesis, its opposite, is Torah Sheba'al Peh. Precisely the creativity of the Talmud Chacham that creates a kedusha because it acknowledges the neshama that we have inside of us that allows us to connect to the Rabbeinu Shalom via our seichel, through working hard and toiling and working something out. And that can't even be captured b'ksav, because then it's to lose its connection. It's the Devar Elokim as it speaks through the Talmud Chacham. Just to give you a concept from a slightly deeper sefer of how this plays out, it's from a Kabbalah source. The Vilna Gaon, I'll just just quickly introduce an idea. We paskin, the halacha is, Eretz Yisrael was conquered twice, in the days of Yehoshua and the days of Ezra. And the Rambam paskins that the first time it was conquered, it was temporary. The second time when Ezra, right, just the time of the Purim story, that Kedusha, the sanctity that he brought into the land, that is eternal. Vilna Gaon points out, this is something you have to be sensitive to, those two words, Yehoshua and Ezra. Other Mefarshim talk about it when we speak about machlokes between Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Eliezer. Oizer u'Moshiach. Hashem helps in two ways. Yehoshua, for example, Rabbi Yehoshua says, "B'Nissan nivra ha'olam." The world was created in Nissan. Yehoshua means Hashem helps. He does it. Nissan is the month in which Hashem just takes us out. Are we worthy? No. Do we deserve it? No. He kind of does it all. Yeah, Aries, we're the lamb. We're just passive. He just takes us out. It's chesed. It's arusa de la'ela. Oizer means he helps. He supports. We do it, but he supports. That's Ezra and Yehoshua. Yehoshua entered the land and it was miraculous. And yet, that Kedusha didn't last. Ezra HaSefer, very great, but it's a lower level. And yet that's eternal. Explanation is, Mitchilas binyan bayis sheni, niftechu sharei hashamayim. The Kabbalah sources indicate that at the time that of the Chanukah story, from Bayis Sheni, when Torah Shebaal Peh flourishes, the Chachomim access an ability to connect to the Rebbeinu Shalom in a way that was not open to them before. Kedusha Rishona the first Kedusha didn't happen forever. Ulecheira yupole. Halo Kedusha Rishona hoya alidei kol Yisrael yachad ubegilui shchina v'ha'oren kapoires ukruvim. The method with which the Eretz Yisrael was sanctified the first time round was incredible, and yet it didn't last. How is it possible the second one could make a greater ration? The answer is ki bebiya shniya mosalahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu hashlita al kol ma'aseh bereishis. HaKadosh Baruch Hu handed over until that point in time, and here we go back to what we started with this evening, the Gemara in Yuma about there being two structures of Nisim. There is Nes that is to be written down, and then there is Nes that cannot and should not and must not be written down. It is the Nes of what happens when a Jew connects to the Rebbeinu Shalom through Torah. And that's far greater. And that is the answer, says the Yaris Dvash, says Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, to the question that we started with this evening. Why is it that when we were searching for metaphors with which to describe Nes versus Teva, miracle versus nature, we use night and day in the opposite way? The answer is because from that moment onwards, he says it was day. We didn't need Nes anymore. It's an incredible chiddush, an incredible innovation. He said there was no need. From that moment on, there are avenues through which a Jew, despite the all-pervasive atheism, at the Purim story we had doubt. That's what Amalek is, always about doubt. And doubt hardened into atheism. But from the moment that the Sha'arim, the gates of Torah Shebaal Peh opened up at the time of Bayis Sheni, from that moment on, there was the ability to connect to the Rebbeinu Shalom in a way that was deeper. We have to be careful what words we use. It might not have been greater in absolute terms, but it had the ability to wipe away the cobwebs. If you learn Torah, you know yourselves, we all know here. That's what's so special about Yiddishkeit when it is applied correctly. We have belief, but that belief isn't just blind. What does it mean to be a human being? It's these two parts. We have a head and we have a heart. And the two bits have to work in sync together. We clarify things. And then we energize ourselves and our emotions to remain motivated and on course, on task to them. And together, that is the incredible thing. And the Rebbeinu Shalom's connection to us, I want to move on a little bit. The Rebbeinu Shalom's connection to us is on the basis of Torah Sheba'al Peh, not on the basis of Torah Shebichsav. Says the Gemara, Ki al pi hadvarim ha'ele karati et chabris ves Yisrael. Says the Gemara on al pi hadvarim ha'ele. Loi karas HaKadosh Baruch Hu brisim Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu only made a permanent covenant with Klal Yisrael only on the basis of Torah Sheba'al Peh, of the oral law, not the written law. Why? Now here's the kicker, and here's where it gets a little bit edgy. I'm going to need to go back to our Syrian Greeks, because there's a problem here. Not only do we have the problem of their arrogance and their atheism, putting man at the center, but if I have a brain and you have a brain, there's nothing to divide us. If that's all we are, if we atomize it, if that's all it is, then I have a brain and you have a brain. And provided we're both clever, there is going to be no difference between us. The idea of ato bechartonu mikol ha'amim, the idea of being a chosen nation, of relationship, of being beloved to Hashem, special, different, exclusive, unique relationship, that is, in English the word is anathema. That's wrong. And that's playing itself out today. You have to be very careful how we use that. We say, that's not racism, because the flip side of privilege is responsibility. It's an open club. Anybody who wants to join and is serious and is committed, you have to be pretty committed, gets a neshama and can be beloved by the Rebbeinu Shalom. You don't have to be, never mind. We're not the religion of love that says a couple of other things. Let's be careful what one says nowadays. But this notion of bland homogeneity, everything the same, because if that's all we are, is the brain, then it's all the same. And this is what Chanukah, and this is what they couldn't stand. You think you're special, you're different. You have wisdom, we want it. We'll translate it. We want it, Ptolemy, right? We want it in our libraries. We know that you have wisdom, they say to us, but it's exactly the same. We're going to translate it. What happens when you translate something? However good you are, especially when you take Torah, where the shape of the letters, where the gematria, where the combination of the letters, where everything, where it is MS at every level. How many layers of meaning are there in a letter? Rabbi Akiva, at the end of his life, what is he doing? Ois de Rabbi Akiva. He goes back to Aleph base to deconstruct Aleph base. Only in Torah. You rob it of its myriad layers of meaning and it becomes one bland and one-dimensional. That's what they want. And we say, no, we have a special relationship with the Rebbeinu Shalom. It's unique. And that's what they couldn't stand. So what did they do? Look what they did. And here we'll delve and we'll bring things to a close shortly, even though there's a lot more that one could say. But I want to delve also a little bit into the realm of remez, because it's good fun, and also it's a way of demonstrating how Torah operates at so many different levels. What did they do? Says the Mishnah in Midos, they entered and they breached. They breached the walls. What did they do? They took a little wall called the Soireg. It's a little wall. It's a meter high. It was a meter high. That's all it was. It's this high. And they punched 13 holes into it, says the Mishnah in Maseches Midos. That was what they did. They didn't destroy the Beis HaMikdash because they wanted to destroy a very beautiful architectural edifice, an imposing edifice. They're not going to destroy that. It's beautiful. But it's not special. It's not unique. There's no notion of holiness. And therefore, what was that wall? That was the wall in the Azorah that demarcated the line beyond which a Gentile was not allowed to pass. That's what the Soireg was. And so they punched 13 holes in it. Ukenegdom, says the Mishnah, that we bow down 3 times, hoid, again, acknowledging that we repaired it. What did they want to do? They wanted to take away and strip away any notion of us being different, special, exclusive, unique, having a special relationship with the Rebbeinu Shalom, because that's what Torah Sheba'al Peh implies. And on that was what we fought back on. That's what we fought back for. That's what it's about. That's what Chanukah is about absolutely in a nutshell. Even down to the level, we'll cut this short. we explained, the Aristavash explained that there was no need for miracle anymore. I'm surprised nobody asked me yet. If after Esther there was no need for miracle, then why the Chanukah story? And that's a very good question. The Pnei Yeshua asks this question. He doesn't ask it on the basis of that. He asks the following. There were two parts, and it's even more than that. If you know your history, you know that the war was won by this small band of Hashmonaim. And after that, there was this private nace. The first time that an absolute nace, in the real full sense of the word, a suspension of the physical order, the oil that lit, who was there to witness it? It took place in the Chutz of the Beis HaMikdash. It's the first time that a miracle had been done in history that wasn't witnessed by a Novi, brought about by and witnessed by a Novi. Koyanim. Who are Koyanim? Says the Maral, Koyan. What's the gematria of Koyan? 75. Halfway between 70 and 80, halfway between 7 and 8, bridging heaven and earth, the natural, which is always 7, and 8, which is always lemala mider chateva. That's what they do. They witnessed it. What was the purpose of the nace? The halacha is tuma hutra b'tzibur. The halacha is we could have even used the impure oil. It would have been perfectly okay. If you only have impure oil, you can use it. And more than that, who said you can't use this oil? And why can't you use this oil? The ink was barely dry on the gezerah, on the decree that Chazal had just made that you can't have the shemen, that it makes it tomei. It's not minat Torah, it's okay. Biblically, there's no problem to use this oil anyway. And even midrabanan, it had just been, they had just promulgated this, virtually. The ink was barely dry on it, and Hashem does an unnecessary nace. Unnecessary because of what we said from the Aristavash. No need for nace anymore. We now have the capacity to connect to Hashem in a way that is deeper and more lasting, and technically there was no need for this. Absolutely no need. And by the way, we know Hashem only does listen when there's a need for it. The Rambam writes, why did Hashem, he writes in Perek Vav, I think it is, he'll see Seder Torah, when he talks about the nisim that were done in the Midbar, he said they were not done as proofs for Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah. We do not base our religion on miracles. Because anybody who bases his religion on miracles is simple and feeble-minded. It's not the yesh b'libo doifi. No, we needed something to eat in the midbar, so Hashem brought down the mon. We needed to get across the Yam Suf, so he split it. There's exact words in the Rambam. So, and now what's happening? We're having a miracle which is unnecessary. What's going on? The answer is that is exactly what is going on. When you do something for somebody else that is unnecessary, that is a demonstration of love and the uniqueness and the depth of a relationship. If you buy your wife flowers for Shabbos out of a sense of duty, don't bother. Mitzvahs ner Chanukah mitzvah chaviva hi ad ma'oid. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu transcending the laws of nature when there was no need for it. Absolutely no need halachically, no need at any level. And that's the point. That's exactly the point. The idea that our relationship that we have with Hashem is a special one. It's a unique one. And this is the very, very last miracle. The very last one, which can't even be written down. It emanates, as it were, from Torah Shebal Peh, where the Kedusha is in the breath, as it were, of the Chacham from who it emanates. And I'm going to finish off, if I may. I'll take questions afterwards. What did you want to ask?
Just on the very point you made about unnecessary names.
Yeah.
Could it be a recompense for the unnecessary order of when it's 12 to do the mitzvah of
Indeed. Yes, absolutely. I can't remember, somebody mentions that. Was that Spasemus or somebody? Absolutely, yes. Beautiful. Absolutely. There's more on, it's sort of kind of in this vein. But I want to take a quick detour because it's good fun. I hope you'll indulge me for 2 more minutes. We're going to do something. I'm going to go into a little bit into the world of gematria, just a little bit, just to show a few interesting things, if I may. Okay. So we mentioned before. Let's do it like this. We'll do it like this. So the first thing is from the Arizal. Uminoisar kankanim. Na'asa neis la Shoishanim. So we sing from that was left over in the jugs. A miracle was made for the roses. Now Rashi in She'ashirim explains that a Shoshana is a reference. The rose is a reference to Talmidei Chachamim, who are fragrant, they are humble, they are full of mitzvahs, they are pliant, it's a reference to Shoshanim. Now, the Arizal, the Ari HaKadosh says as follows, and before I tell you the Arizal, I'm going to reference a couple of things. I don't know if you noticed before that there was a reference that we said that the Syrian Greeks punched through 13 holes, 13 breaches in this little wall. The significance of the number 13 is quite fascinating. The Sfarim HaKadoshim tell us that 13, in terms of gematria, is both echad and ahava, which is quite well known. It is also, if you want to be philosophical for a minute, the Ramchal and others talk about this, the Maral, that every three-dimensional object has 12 lines, Yud Beis Kaveh Alachson, right? And then the 13th is the notional center which holds all of that together. Again, it's just signifying oneness and uniqueness and being complete. Now, let's look just very briefly at what happened there. How many Chashmonaim were there? 13, of course. Rashi and V'zoi Sabracha, right? So there's 13 Chashmonaim. Rashi says in V'zoi Sabracha. That we've had already the numbers of bowing down, and the thing was 13. Let's look at what they were attacking. Shabbos, Chodesh, and Milah. Okay, Shabbos, Chodesh, and Milah. See if we can find any references here. Shabbos, the 39 malachas, which are the main ways that you can break that kedusha that Hashem puts into the space, is divided into the 3 times in Shabbos, which each have a unique significance through the 3 seudos, which again signifies 13. There are 13 months, of course, especially this year. And Bris Milah says the Gemara, Gedoyla Milah, Shenichrisa Aleho Yud Gimel Brisa, says the Gemara, 13 times in the Torah, the concept of Bris Milah is mentioned. Let's go to the 3 primary ways that we connect to the Rabbeinu Shalom. We connect to the Rabbeinu Shalom through our head, through our heart, and then he reciprocates. Through our head, the 3rd Yud Gimel Midas Torah Nidreshes Bahen. That's how we learn Torah, the 13 ways that we articulate Torah. And in our belief system, the 13 Ikrei Emunah, the 13 of the Animamins of the Rambam. We'll go back to the Arizal. Not going to manage to do it on this one, so I'm going to get a new sheet. Now let's go, and when we connect to the Rabbeinu Shalom, says the Shloach Kodesh, and there's a tefillah that some people say at the bris. When you connect to the Rabbeinu Shalom through your head and heart, the Yud Gimel Midas HaTorah Nidreshes Ben, and the Yud Gimel Ikrim, he responds with the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim. Right? He responds with that which we invoke on Yom Kippurim, especially towards the end of Yom Kippurim, as part which is a bris. Again, it is him declaring that he will not abandon us and he will be there for us. Let's go back over here. Uminoisar kankanim nasones lashoishanim. Says the Arizal. There's another 13, I've forgotten it. Says the Arizal, that word can, right? Says the Arizal, the final one of the 13 of the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim, the final one, the spitz, is v'nakei loy yenakei. Hashem will cleanse anybody who does tshuva. It doesn't matter how far you have strayed. Again, this is an indication of the eternity of the relationship. Doesn't matter how far you've strayed. If a Jew does tshuva, yenakei, he'll cleanse us lovingly, as he does on Yom Kippurim. But lo yenakei if einam shavim. Whatever you've done, there's no such thing as a Jew that is cast away. Do tshuva, come back, acknowledge me, a bit of humility, a bit of love, acknowledge the relationship, I'll cleanse you. Take away minoisar, from that which is left over, says the Arizal, from the kan, v'nake lo yenake, you're left with yud ke vav he. Shoshana, that's what the Arizal says. That means that a Jew is always able to connect back to the Rabbeinu Shalom. in Kabbalistic thought, a Shoshana is a 13-petaled rose for various reasons. Now we see, it occurred to me, we have a very simple formula. Minoisar kankanim, that which, according from the Arizal, that which were left over from the kankanim, is the Yud K Vav K. I'm not going to write it properly, i.e. that's 26, yes? So Nes was done la Shoshanim. 2 roses, a rose is 13 petals, that's also, it's a formula. There's an equivalence on both sides. It's only in the world of Remez, but there's more as well, but just to finish off with a little bit of gematria, and that's even just in a pismon. The bottom line, what we want to walk away from, hopefully this evening, is I'll summarize very quickly 2 or 3 quick points. The arrogance of the scientific system. We're not anti-science, chas v'shalom. Of course not. Empirical evidence is empirical evidence. And this is why it was so near yet so far. The Torah also, the system puts man at the center of the universe. We are here, as a thinking being, we have responsibility, but that's by virtue of our connection to the Ribbono Shel Olam. And that has to be acknowledged. That humility, that has to be acknowledged. The minute you deny that and you cut that out, that's choshech, that's total darkness. And what Chanukah celebrates is the Ribbono Shel Olam, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, I think, used to say, this unnecessary nace was Hashem's kiss to us just before he sent us out into the rest of Golus before Mashiach. Lohidia, that Chavivin Klal Yisrael, we are beloved to the Ribbono Shel Olam. Every single one of us have the ability, through applying ourselves to Torah in thought and in deed and in practice, to know that we are Chavivin, we're beloved of the Ribbono Shel Olam, we are his people, and that whatever happens, he's always there for us. Alichtag and Chanukah, thank you for joining me. Good night, everyone. Carl, take care.